which is on 1212. Matthew Elliott joins me this morning after writing a terrific column in the Telegraph yesterday. Tell me, Matthew, before we go to matters of British politics, what is the greatest rivalry in United Kingdom football?
Oh, that's a really good question, Hugh. I think it must be Manchester City versus Manchester United.
Okay, Manchester City versus Manchester United is probably the Ohio State Michigan of England, right? That's what we're talking about.
Absolutely, yeah. The Northwest is very similar to Michigan and Detroit, yes.
All right, so you understand why I'm playing the Ohio State song that we love to play this week. Now, my second must-ask question to Matthew Elliott. My son turned me on last week to Peaky Blinders, which I've now binge-watched about 2 seasons of. Was that a hit in the UK?
I have literally never heard of the show. I'm so sorry to say that. And I like my Netflix box sets and that sort of thing. So sorry, I hadn't heard of it.
It's a BBC show. Peaky Blinders. It's set in 1918 to 1925, Great Britain and Birmingham. It's really wonderfully done. I recommend it highly. Now let's talk about the election. The Conservative Manifesto was published this weekend. Will you explain to the American audience what these manifestos are about?
Absolutely. So we have this tradition in the UK that every party at the election will publish their manifesto, their platform, if you like, of what will happen, what they'll do if they get elected into office. And this has been a tradition for many, many years. And often it's been a source of a few mishaps. So, for example, in 1983, the Labour Party produced a very left-wing manifesto, similar to one this time round, which was then described as the longest suicide note in history. So it scared people off. And of course, Theresa May, back in 2017, in her election, it was a very rushed manifesto. It was produced by a very small circle of advisors who were slightly arrogant, it must be said, about their knowledge of policy. And of course, it had the thing which really unrailed her campaign, the pledge on social care. So these can be a minefield. And this time round, Boris has gone for, I would say, a steady as she goes manifesto. So we've heard a lot from Boris in his first 100-plus days as PM. He's outlined a lot of policies already. So really, it's reiterating those policies.
Now, Matthew Elliott, and you can follow Matthew at Matthew_Elliott, 2 L's, 2 T's. I'm impressed by a Corbyn-neutral United Kingdom. It's one of the great taglines I've ever seen come up with. Did you have a hand in that? Was that Dominic? Corbyn-neutral United Kingdom is just a great phrase.
I think that was done by CCHQ, who are doing a lot of polling and market research for this election. So that's absolutely what we want. And what's really interesting is that voters are starting to see this as being a two-horse race. There's a clear choice here between giving Boris the majority, allowing him to govern properly without being paralysed by Parliament, versus, frankly, another hung Parliament where it'd be more of the same, more paralysis, not getting Brexit done. And people have that clear choice. And you're seeing a big uptick in support for the Conservatives, a bit of an uptick in support for Labour, and the Liberal Democrats and the Brexit Party and the other parties slowly falling away.
Now, I noted that Nigel Farage, who has some followers in the United States, I'm not among them, but
yeah,
he has some fans here, yesterday said that he appreciated Boris Johnson's promise to crash out if a free trade deal could not be reached with the EU after Brexit is reached. It seemed to me another sign that Nigel Farage is coming to grips with the fact he has accomplished his goal. That we are within reach of seeing the United Kingdom leave the EU, but that the Brexit Party is an impediment. Is that generally the appreciation of his statements to date?
He's sending out a lot of mixed signals in the recent days. So, for example, he had a big interview on newspapers yesterday, talked about how after the election he'd be rebranding the Brexit Party, the Reform Party, to basically be a new centre-right populist party, talking about reforming politics and taking on the establishment. So I get the feeling that he likes to see his name up in lights. He likes to be on TV. He likes to see his name in the papers. So every now and again he throws these things out there. But really I think that his move the other week, the one we discussed, where he stood down his candidates in all the Conservative Party seats, was really the decisive moment of this election campaign. That's the pivot where the Tories started climbing up, and it became clear that they'd be able to get a majority.
Now, Matthew Elliott, I'm old enough to remember 1984 in the United States where Ronald Reagan stumbled a little bit in the first debate, came back, and it looked like he was going to, and in fact did crush Walter Mondale. But I then got worried that he was too far ahead and that no one would vote. Is there that anxiety building on the Tory side now?
Well, they're certainly not being complacent, and they realise there are still, a good few weeks to go. And of course, there's several things that could be problematic for the Conservatives. So, for example, speaking frankly, when the NATO summit happens at the beginning of December, basically next week, of course, there'll be lots of different heads of government in town, including President Trump. And it must be said at that point, they'll be looking very carefully to see what President Trump says in interviews and on his Twitter feed about the election. Because frankly, if Boris Johnson is seen to be too close to President Trump, that will turn off quite a few of those more swing voters that he needs to win over, particularly those in the Midlands and north of England. So it could be a bit of a stumbling block at that point. So I really hope, in a way, that President Trump stays out of the election. It could be a bit of a curse if he says too much in support of Boris Johnson. I hate saying that, being a big friend of America myself, and indeed my wife is chairman of Republicans Overseas UK.
I have no problem with it. I wouldn't want Boris Johnson urging on Donald Trump on the American voter in 2020. I do like to cover the election because I think it has international consequences, but I'm not telling Brits how to vote. Let me ask you about the alleged realignment that is occurring. It's a realignment that we've seen in the United States in 2016 that seems to be reemerging in the course of the impeachment sham show trial, where blue-collar, middle Americans are moving into the Republican column solidly. It seems to me a lot of labor voters are moving solidly into the Tory column. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it's absolutely outstanding. The pictures we're now seeing of when Boris is doing his campaign stops and stopping at factories and seeing manufacturing workers across the country basically holding up signs saying "We love Boris" and things like that. This being a big realignment, and if you look at the working class support in the polls, the Tories are now outpacing Labour by 2-1 amongst the working classes. Now, what will be really interesting to see is what will happen over the next Parliament, over the next 5 years. And I'm assuming that Boris gets re-elected now. What will happen? How will Labour react to the election result? I hope Jeremy Corbyn resigns. If he doesn't, I think he'll be ditched. What sort of leader will they go for? Will they go for more of a sort of centrist, sort of Tony Blair type figure? Or will they go for a younger version of Corbyn without all the baggage? I think that will be crucial because I think in the next 5 years, there will be that point where there'll probably be another global recession, possibly even another financial crisis. And at that point, you'll be interested to see whether the public go back behind Labour or whether they stick with the Conservatives. And this could be a game changer. We could be in a situation where Brexit has fundamentally realigned British politics, but it's too early to tell.
Now, Matthew Elliott, if Boris Johnson is returned and the Tories have a significant majority, he's sort of aligned the party behind him. He's gotten rid of the Remainers. He's gotten rid of the wets, in other words. Yeah. But I don't expect a radical conservatism. He's in favor of carbon reductions and things like that. I do expect, though, that pension reform, National Health Service spending, the new nurses, public security, the anti-knife provision, I kind of expect an energized model of how conservatism can actually work and deliver. Is that what you're hoping for?
Absolutely. And if you look at the team around him in number 10, they are 100% committed to delivering, particularly my former colleague from Vote Leave, Dominic Cummings, who's really in the heart of things, driving things very quickly. And I think they're excited about the manifesto. You asked me about that. They're standing on. It does have measures which will be very voter-friendly. I think they've learned from, for example, President Trump, how good he's been at keeping to his promises. What he said in his campaign in 2016, he's delivering on. And I think similarly, Boris will want to do the same thing. But it has been a very difficult period for the Conservatives ever since David Cameron got elected as part of a coalition with Nick Clegg. Then, of course, you had the very short Parliament when the Tories were in a majority, but that was defined by the Brexit referendum. And then, of course, Theresa May lost that majority, so it's been a hung Parliament again. So really, you've had 9 years where it's been very difficult for the Conservative Party to really meet every pledge that they said they would at the previous election. So this gives us a unique opportunity. You're having that full majority, meeting those promises. And the other crucial point that isn't really mentioned in the manifestos is the fact that once Brexit is done in January, there is a wave of investment waiting to come into the UK and waiting to be invested by domestic entrepreneurs as well. And I think that will lead to quite an uptick in the economy. And that'll be really exciting as well, because that'll bring in more revenue for the government and hopefully some of the tax cuts, which I hope for as a former head of the UK Taxpayers Alliance, we'll start seeing a few more tax cuts as well.
Very quickly, Matthew Elliott, because we're not talking on Thursday. America's Thanksgiving is pre-recorded, so I won't talk to you next week. It seems to me that the knife incidents, the security concerns, traveling through Heathrow impressed this on me, that security is not at the front, but it needs to be always on the mind of the voters. Is it?
I think security is on the mind of voters in this election in the sense of Jeremy Corbyn. And over the weekend, you had a very senior former head of MI5 coming out and basically saying that were he still to be head of MI5, he wouldn't be giving Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister all of the confidential information that he had as head. So I think in terms of fitness for office, that's really how it's materialised in this election. And people can just see that, as my good friend Sajid Javid, who's the Chancellor over here, the Finance Minister in the UK, as he said when he was Home Secretary over here, he wouldn't have given Jeremy Corbyn a building pass to the Home Office. He wouldn't have been able to pass the security clearance. So that's how bad things are. So that's how security has come forward in this election.
Matthew Elliott, we'll talk to you next week. Follow him on Twitter in the meantime.